Welcome back to Wicked Chronicles. If you haven't watched Part 1 and Part 2 yet, make sure to check them out before diving into this next chapter. As a recap of Part 2, Detective Elise Hart's investigation took a dark turn as the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, but the picture they revealed was far more terrifying than she ever expected. The councilman's murder was no random act. Someone had accessed his safe before the police arrived, and the only person who knew the code, Catherine Watts, insisted she wasn't involved. But her hesitations, her fleeting reactions, and the growing number of inconsistencies in her story told Elise otherwise. Then came the anonymous warning. You're looking in the wrong place. Watch the widow. Someone out there was guiding Elise toward the truth or leading her into a trap. As she dug deeper, the scope of the conspiracy widened. The Crimson Vow was more than just a syndicate. It was a force embedded within the very foundations of Blackridge City. The crime scene, the missing evidence, the erased security footage, none of it was a coincidence. Someone powerful was working in the shadows, making sure the real truth never saw the light of day. Now in Part 3, Elise must push past the deception and follow the trail, wherever it leads. But the closer she gets to the truth, the higher the cost. Betrayals are waiting in the shadows, lies are about to unravel, and Elise will soon learn that in Blackridge City, knowing too much can be deadly. Stay tuned, the real game is about to begin. The rain had picked up again by the time Elise made her way to the meeting spot. The parking garage was a desolate structure on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that invited secrecy and made you look over your shoulder every few seconds. Her boots echoed against the damp concrete as she scanned her surroundings, her hand hovering near the gun holstered at her hip. Cipher had chosen the location, and despite their cryptic messages and warnings, Elise wasn't entirely sure she could trust them. Whoever they were, they had been pulling strings and dropping breadcrumbs since the start of the case. Whether they were helping or manipulating her, she wasn't sure yet. She reached the designated level and stopped. A lone figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by the hood of a weathered jacket. The figure was thin, wiry, and moved with a jittery energy that reminded Elise of someone perpetually looking over their shoulder.
You're late,
Elise said, her voice cutting through the stillness. Cipher chuckled nervously.
You're lucky I showed up at all. You're not exactly the most popular person in Blackridge right now.
Elise didn't respond, keeping her hand on her weapon as Cipher approached. They stopped a few feet away, pulling a flash drive from their pocket and holding it up like a peace offering.
What's on it?
Elise asked.
Names, transactions, connections.
Cipher said, their voice barely above a whisper.
The Crimson Vow isn't just a street gang, detective. They're a machine. Politicians, judges, cops, they've got people everywhere.
Elise took the flash drive but didn't break eye contact with Cipher.
Why are you helping me? What do you get out of this?
Helping you? I'm not helping you. I'm trying to survive. You think I'm some good Samaritan? The only reason I'm still breathing is because I know how to keep myself useful. If the Vow knew I was here, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Elise studied them for a moment, then pocketed the drive.
If this intel is as good as you say, why not go to the feds? Or better yet, why not disappear?
Cipher's expression darkened.
Disappear? There's no disappearing from the Crimson Vow. They'll find you no matter where you go. And the feds? They scoffed. You think they're clean? Half of them are probably on the Vow's payroll.
Elise's grip on her gun tightened slightly. Cipher's paranoia was infectious, but they weren't wrong. The deeper she dug into this case, the more it felt like the walls were closing in.
Just remember, they're watching you too. You think you're safe because you're a cop? They don't care. They'll bury you just like they buried Watts.
What do you mean, bury? You think Watts' murder was more than a message?
Cipher nodded.
Watts wasn't just some politician with a guilty conscience. He was part of something bigger, something that threatened their whole operation. That's why he's dead. And if you don't tread carefully, you're next.
Back at the precinct, Elise sat at her desk, staring at the flash drive like it was a loaded weapon. Cipher's words echoed in her mind. They'll bury you, just like they buried Watts. She plugged the drive into her laptop, her heartbeat quickening as the files loaded. What she found made her stomach churn. The first file was a list of names, politicians, high-ranking law enforcement officials, and even prominent business leaders. At the top of the list was a name she recognized immediately, Councilman Henry Watts. Below Watts's name, highlighted in red, were several others marked as eliminated.
Jesus.
She whispered under her breath. The second file was a series of transaction records. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing through offshore accounts, routed through shell companies with innocuous names. One of the accounts stood out. It was tied to a company called Blackridge Development Initiative, a name Elise knew well. It was a government-funded project to revitalize the city's infrastructure, spearheaded by none other than Leo Carter. Her blood ran cold. Leo had never mentioned his involvement with the project, but now it was staring her in the face, a direct financial link to the Crimson Vow. The final file was the most damning: surveillance footage. It showed a meeting in a dimly lit room, the faces of the participants partially obscured by shadows. One of them was Victor Sloan, the enforcer Elise had been chasing for weeks. But what sent a chill down her spine was the man sitting across from him, her partner, Leo Carter. The audio was grainy, but she could make out snippets of their conversation. You keep feeding her just enough to keep her spinning in circles. That's your job. And if she stops spinning, then we bury her too. Elise slammed her laptop shut, her heart pounding. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Her partner, her closest ally, had been feeding her lies. He wasn't just compromised, he was working directly with the Crimson Vow. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was another message from Cipher. You've seen enough. What are you going to do now? Elise stared at the message, her mind racing. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Confronting Leo now would be reckless, but doing nothing was out of the question. She typed back, "I'll handle it." The reply came instantly. "Be careful, detective. The closer you get, the harder they'll push back." That night, Elise sat in her car outside the precinct, watching as Leo exited the building. He looked calm, casual, like nothing was out of the ordinary. But Elise knew better. As she tailed him through the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to come crashing down. Leo Carter wasn't just her partner anymore. He was her next suspect. The night air was sharp and heavy as Elise parked her car half a block from the warehouse. The industrial area was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional clatter of loose metal in the wind. The streetlights were dim, their flickering glow casting distorted shadows across the cracked pavement. She stayed low as she stepped out, pulling her coat tighter around her, her hand brushing against the holstered gun at her hip. Leo Carter had led her here. Her partner, someone she had trusted with her life, was now the focus of her growing suspicion. She had spent the last 2 hours reviewing the surveillance footage from the flash drive Cipher had given her, the damning clip of Leo speaking with Victor Sloan playing on a loop in her mind. The audio was grainy, but the words were clear enough to send a chill down her spine. You keep feeding her just enough to keep her spinning in circles. That's your job. Elise had to know the truth. If Leo was working with the Crimson Vow, she needed answers before he realized she was onto him. The warehouse loomed ahead, its hulking frame silhouetted against the faint glow of the city in the distance. Elise approached cautiously, her boots making barely a sound on the wet pavement. The side door was slightly ajar, a faint beam of light spilling out onto the ground. She peeked inside, her heart pounding as she spotted 2 figures in the dimly lit interior. One was unmistakably Leo. He stood with his arms crossed, his posture tense. The other was Victor Sloan, the enforcer for the Crimson Vow. Victor leaned against a rusted metal table, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to Leo's rigid stance. Elise adjusted the small listening device she had planted on Leo's car earlier that day, the faint static resolving into their hushed voices.
She's getting too close?
Leo said, his voice low but urgent. Victor smirked, the expression visible even from Elise's vantage point.
Then keep her busy. Feed her breadcrumbs. We don't need her sniffing around our business.
Leo's jaw tightened.
It's not that simple. Elise isn't like the others. She doesn't let things go. If I keep pushing her in the wrong direction, she'll figure it out.
Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look.
Are you questioning your role here, Carter? Because if you are, we have other ways to deal with her.
Leo didn't respond immediately, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Elise clenched her fists, every fiber of her being screaming for her to storm in and confront him. But she forced herself to wait, to listen. Finally, Leo spoke, his tone edged with defiance.
I know how to handle her. Just give me time.
Victor's gaze lingered on Leo for a moment before he pushed off the table.
Good, because if you don't, we'll handle her ourselves. And you won't like how we do it.
As Victor turned to leave, Elise ducked back into the shadows, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they would hear it. She waited until the sound of Victor's footsteps faded before stepping into the light, her gun drawn and pointed directly at Leo.
Don't move.
She said, her voice cold and steady. Leo froze, his hands instinctively going up.
Elise, what the hell are you doing?
You tell me. Why are you meeting with Victor Sloan? And don't give me some half-baked excuse about a case. I saw the footage, Leo. I heard the recording.
Leo's expression shifted from shock to resignation. He lowered his hands slowly, his shoulders slumping.
I can explain.
Start talking.
Leo took a deep breath, his eyes locked on hers.
I've been undercover, Elise. For 2 years, I've been feeding the Crimson Vow just enough information to keep my cover intact. The plan was to get close to the higher-ups, find out who's really pulling the strings.
And you didn't think to tell me?
Elise's voice wavered with a mix of anger and betrayal.
I couldn't. The less you knew, the safer you were. If they even suspected that I'd told you, we'd both be dead.
Elise didn't lower her gun.
So what? You just let me run around in circles, chasing leads you knew were dead ends?
It wasn't like that. I tried to steer you away when it got too dangerous, but you're relentless, Elise. You don't stop, and I didn't want you to stop. I just needed to buy time.
Time for what?
For this,
Leo said, reaching into his jacket pocket slowly, his movements deliberate. He pulled out a small flash drive and held it up.
this has everything. Names, locations, financial records. I've been gathering it piece by piece, waiting for the right moment to hand it over.
Elise hesitated, her grip on her gun loosening slightly.
If this is true, why didn't you go to Internal Affairs? Why keep me in the dark?
Leo's expression hardened.
You think Internal Affairs is clean? Half the department is on the Crimson Vow's payroll. If I'd gone to them, this would have been buried, and I'd be dead. The only person I could trust was you, but I couldn't risk telling you. Not until I had something concrete.
Elise lowered her gun, but kept it in her hand.
So now what? You expect me to trust you after everything?
I don't expect anything. But I'm telling you the truth, Elise. I've been playing both sides because it was the only way to survive. But if we don't work together now, we're both as good as dead.
Before Elise could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from Cipher. Warehouse compromised, get out now. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking with Leo's.
Did you set me up?
Leo's eyes widened.
No, but if they're coming, we need to move, now.
As if on cue, the sound of engines revving echoed through the warehouse. Elise and Leo exchanged a look before sprinting toward the back exit. The sound of heavy boots and shouts growing louder behind them. They barely made it out before the first shots rang out. Bullets ricocheting off the walls as they disappeared into the night. Thanks for sticking with us through part 3 of Wicked Chronicles: The Crimson Vow. But if you thought the danger was over, think again. What's coming next will change everything. Elise Hart has spent her career chasing the truth. But in Black Ridge City, the truth is a weapon, and someone is using it against her. The deeper she digs, the more she realizes that every move she makes has been predicted. Every step leading her further into a game she never agreed to play. The Crimson Vow isn't just an organization, it's an empire. In the next chapters, Elise will face the consequences of getting too close. Friends will turn into enemies. A secret buried for decades will come to light. And the real puppet masters behind Black Ridge's corruption will finally reveal themselves. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part.